The United Nations Security Council discusses the situation in Yemen. A recent report warns that famine in Yemen will increase fivefold during 2022. The Red Cross urged donors to fully fund Yemen humanitarian response plan. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Swaylam. The UN Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, briefed the Security Council on the latest developments in Yemen. In his briefing, the UN envoy called upon all parties to honor the holy month of Ramadan and to engage actively in the political consultations to reach a settlement to the conflict. Grunberg as well called the political parties to represent women in the consultations with 30%. He reiterated that military option will not end the war and there is a need for dialogue.
Yemenis have been denied the possibility of living in peace for too many years. We need a joint concerted effort by Yemenis and the international community to break this never-ending cycle of violence and lay the foundation for sustainable peace. With Ramadan approaching, I hope the parties will engage swiftly and constructively with my proposals to bring the people of Yemen some much-needed hope and relief. In this regard, I'm looking forward for the opportunity to engage with the leadership of Ansar Allah and Sana'a on this issue and on how we can move the political process forward.
Earlier, the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, met in the Jordanian capital Amman with leaders from the General People's Congress Party. The meeting comes in the context of consultations that Grunberg is making on a framework that defines a multi-track process that addresses both immediate and long-term priorities for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Yemen. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Yemen warned that the humanitarian situation in Yemen could further deteriorate. It estimated that during the coming period, up to December, the number of people who will be unable to meet their minimum food requirements will reach 19 million. For his part, humanitarian coordinator in Yemen, David Grisley, stated that parties must lift all restrictions on trade and investment. UN agencies and international aid groups said that thousands in war-torn Yemen are likely to experience famine over the second half of 2022. These worrying figures are a countdown to catastrophe in Yemen, which is a fivefold increase from the current figure of famine. More details are in the following report.
Yemen's famine to increase fivefold this year. This came as a statement in a report issued by 15 UN agencies. The organization stated that 19 million people are likely to be unable to meet their minimum food needs during the second half of 2022. In Yemen, 2.2 million children, including 538,000, are already severely malnourished, and about 1.3 million women could be acutely malnourished, according to the report. World Food Programme has warned, if the ongoing situation continues in Yemen, it will be hard for Yemeni families to survive. WFP further added that it's running out of funds, which will force the organization to cut part of the food assistance in Yemen. According to the organization, this reduction came at the worst time for Yemeni citizens, who depend mainly on WFP meals to survive. The food crisis has also contributed to the rise of malnutrition rate in the country. The report stressed, the war in Yemen is the main driver of hunger, and the crisis is likely to deteriorate due to the war in Ukraine. For Yemenis, the timing couldn't be worse. As families try to put food on the table, they are being hampered by the knock-on effects of a serious escalation in fighting, alongside the continuing deterioration of the economy. Even before fighting broke out in early 2015, Yemen was one of the poorest countries in the Arab world, and now for 8 years, Yemeni people have been suffering from food shortage and scarcity due to the ongoing war, and higher food prices will push more people into the brutal circle of hunger and dependence on humanitarian assistance. UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen said, "Peace is required to end the food shortage crisis, and all parties to the conflict should lift all restrictions on trade and investment for non-sanctioned commodities to overcome the crisis."
Special envoy for the UN Refugee Agency, actress Angelina Jolie, will take part in this week's donors meeting discussing the situation in Yemen. Jolie will join officials at a virtual fundraiser for Yemen on Wednesday. According to UN officials, the meeting represents an opportunity to demonstrate that the world has not forgotten about Yemen. The following report has more details.
As people continue to suffer as a result of years of conflict, the International Rescue Committee urges donors attending the UN Pledging Conference on Yemen to focus on the country's humanitarian needs. Funding shortage in humanitarian response has already resulted in the reduction of life-saving initiatives. Despite budget cuts and a lack of public attention, Yemen's humanitarian needs continue to rise. Civilian fatalities from airstrikes peaked at 426 in January 2022, the most deadly month in Yemen in the last 5 years. As a result of the conflict and economic collapse, more than 20 million people require humanitarian assistance. Rising inflation and economic conflict exacerbate their weaknesses, leaving many unable to purchase the food they require to survive. These ongoing demands may worsen as a result of the conflict in Ukraine, from which Yemen imports 22% of its wheat consumption. Although Yemen's reliance on imported food is not new, the disruption of crucial imports combined with catastrophic reductions in humanitarian funds threaten driving food costs even higher and further out of reach for the majority of Yemeni people. Years of conflict, diplomatic failures, and economic instability have wreaked havoc on the lives of millions of Yemenis who cannot afford to see more financial cuts to life-saving services such as food, safe drinking water, educational initiatives, and healthcare facilities. The Ukrainian crisis threatens to exacerbate Yemen's already severe food security and humanitarian situation. The humanitarian response plan for 2021 was only 61% financed. The UN World Food Programme has warned that 8 million people have already begun getting decreased food rations as a result of chronic underfunding and insufficient international support. Yemen is one of the world's greatest and most severe humanitarian crises, with years of fighting, infrastructure damage, and a collapsing economy affecting civilians. Donors must not overlook Yemen as the Ukraine crisis threatens to deepen the country's food poverty.
The European Union expressed its great concern over the extent of human rights violations in Yemen. It called on all parties to respect these rights in all circumstances. The mission explained that the war led to an increase in violations of human rights. It stressed that the European Union is fully convinced that there is no military solution to the Yemeni conflict. The European Union has added Houthi militia to the Union's blacklist. The European move aims at freezing the militia's assets and banning its funding. The joint forces thwarted new Houthi attempts to arrange their defenses in two fronts on the western coast. The military media of the joint forces reported that the forces directed strikes, destroying 9 Houthi military vehicles. Next. Third edition of Karama Yemen Film Festival kicks off in 3 governorates.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف والكيس الدقيق ب18,000 والكيس السكر اليوم ب20,000. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالة احنا حالة لما خرج لما ندفنا شلقينا ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل ما احنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. Medical sources at Kuwait Hospital in the center of the capital Sana'a confirmed that the Houthi militia is committing violations against health staff in the hospital. The sources said that the militia killed a specialist in the hospital, beat the health staff, and ripped their documents. According to the sources, the Houthi militia ordered doctors to give priority to its wounded. Medical sources in Tai's governorate launched an urgent call to move quickly to rescue hospitals due to the lack of fuel and the suspension of medical services. More details are in the following report.
Alarm is mounting over the deterioration in health services in Yemen. This time, the distress call came from the governorate of Taiz to the west, for governmental hospitals are running short of fuel. The urgent call appealed to the government, the local authority, and international as well as charity organizations to move quickly to save thousands of patients before diesel runs out in all government hospitals to avoid an imminent health disaster. The significant rise in the value of oil derivatives and the transformation of ties into an open market pointed the finger at those responsible in the city who didn't bother to think about all the reality in the state-run hospitals. The hospitals issued an urgent call for help after desperate attempts to save the lives of patients from certain death due to the running out of fuel and the imminent interruption of medical services, specifically in the heart center, dialysis, intensive care, and surgery operations.
Children often pay the highest price in this war. One child dies every 10 minutes in Yemen because of preventable diseases. Adding to this, the fuel crisis that is manufactured by the Houthi rebels in Yemen, which may aggravate the suffering of children. More details are in the following report.
Because of a dramatic decline in fuel imports, health facilities across the country are being forced to turn off ventilators and other life-saving equipment. Many hospitals have warned that if gasoline deliveries continue to be delayed and restricted, hospitals would be forced to close. The scarcity of gasoline in Yemen is also affecting people's mobility, with reports of 6-kilometer-long lines at Sana'a's gas stations. The crisis was precipitated by a combination of tightened restrictions on petroleum imports into Yemen's Red Sea ports and a lengthy waiting period. Fuel boats are held in the coalition holding area for an average of 112 days, a 543% increase from 2019. As a result, gasoline arrivals in Yemen's Red Sea ports have plummeted dramatically, with 70% less coming in January compared to the same month last year. The nation has endured many fuel crises since the beginning of the conflict. According to doctors, the oil derivatives crisis is already having a lethal impact on healthcare institutions. 6 of Sana'a's 12 operating rooms, as well as half of its incubators, have already been forced to close. The longer the gasoline crisis lasts, the more difficult it will be to reach vulnerable children in need. More than 8 million children are on the verge of starvation and require immediate access to life-saving treatment. Yemen's healthcare system was on the verge of collapse even before the fuel crisis. If immediate action is not taken, the situation in Yemen may develop into a tragedy. Save the Children's country director in Yemen urged conflict parties to follow their commitments under international human rights law and international humanitarian law when engaging in hostilities. Children in Yemen have already been through a lot. Protecting children's lives must be our first concern, and each choice must first consider the influence on children's welfare.
A foundation said the Houthi militia funds their networks mainly from taxes and fees. It said that import and export licenses are granted only to Houthi supporters. More details are in the following report.
The Houthi rebels are accused of manufacturing a new fuel crisis in a move that is seen to enrich the leaders and to finance the group's war. Statistics say that fuel supply to Yemeni ports provides sufficient quantities in the rebels-held areas. Figures, in addition, pointed out that the Houthi share from the Hodeidah port reached 60% of the total imports. Data blames the militia of continuing to unlawfully collect royalties and spending them on the group's leaders and loyalists. The rebels, in addition, spend money they illicitly gather on financing the war, recruitment, and sectarian practices. Looking at the Yemeni oil and gas industry, the country pumped more than 400,000 barrels per day 20 years ago, bringing much-needed revenue to the region's poorest economy. Since 2015, however, output has plummeted to below 100,000 barrels per day. Violence, moreover, has led to a devastating humanitarian crisis and prompted many international oil companies to flee. Without a significant refinery presence, the country is reliant on refined oil products from abroad for its gasoline and diesel needs. With security risks still high, international oil companies would not return, which would put much pressure on the population. Coinciding with that, warnings of funding shortages in Yemen are continuing to impact the humanitarian operation in the country.
The third round of the Human Rights Film Festival in Yemen was launched. The new round advocates for upgrading the human rights situation and helping to voice the misery of victims. More details are in the following report.
Films give voice to our untold stories, and in a torn-apart country, people are insisting to live and shine through showing the world their persistence out of the young talents with one of the most inspiring film festivals. The Yemen Dignity Film Festival for Human Rights is launching its third edition, organized by Youth of the World Together organization and supported by the European Union delegation to Yemen. In its third edition, the festival adopts the slogan Reclaiming Narratives, with the aim of encouraging talents and voices to express themselves, away from stereotypes and misunderstandings from the others.
This festival tackles human rights issues through films, which is indeed a powerful way to expose violations and advocate for justice. It also offers a golden opportunity for Yemeni filmmakers to share their experiences with counterparts from other parts of the world.
The festival was launched in 2019 with the aim of defending issues of human rights and societal justice and opening the door to constructive democratic dialogue around the world. The festival is also considered an important platform for supporting talents, enriching audiences, and emphasizing the diversity of the social, cultural, and life aspects of Yemeni society. Moreover, the festival aims to leave a space for the audience to discuss human rights issues by holding seminars and screening 22 feature films and short documentaries produced by international filmmakers and focusing on local talents who produced these films despite the imposed difficulties and challenges they are going through, and in light of the instability and harsh conditions the country is witnessing. These films are going to be presented in Aden, Taiz, and Hadramaut, as well as online platforms to give the opportunity to people around the world to hear the country's voice.
We organized this festival to guarantee freedom of speech and to help young talents to be the difference they want to be, and we offered a means to deliver voices out of concealment.
The festival is a platform for all those who have experienced the scourge of conflicts and crises. Therefore, it included inspiring songs to give an opportunity for talented and bold voices present their concerns to local and global audiences.
Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The United Nations Security Council discusses the situation in Yemen. A recent report warns that famine in Yemen will increase fivefold during 2022. The Red Cross urged donors to fully fund the Yemen humanitarian response plan. This is the the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.